last year, the Sociology of Law Section decided to give 3 Lifetime Achievements Awards to singular scholars in our field. And in collaboration with Sally Simpson, who's the chair of Crime, Law, and Deviance, we felt very comfortable about this unusual format because these 3 scholars speak to both of our fields. And they are Philip Selznick, William Chambliss, and Arthur Stinchcombe. And I think it's probably quite safe to say that everyone in this room has read a large body of each of their work. And so what we decided to do was to have a conversation about the way law looked when they began their careers. And by way of that, we asked Rosemary, who's an active participant, Rosemary Gardner, I should say, be more formal, Rosemary Gardner, who's active in both of our sections, to moderate. And so the format is that Rosemary is going to make a few brief introductory remarks. Then, I don't know in which order, Bill and Art will comment, and then we'll open it up for questions. And I should just say one last thing, which is, of course, as you obviously see, Philip Selznick is not able to be here today. I spoke with his wife, Doris, earlier today. We were it was minute to minute, but his health is such that she just didn't think he could come out. And she sends her regrets, and I told her to please let him know how important he was to each of us in our own intellectual development. And she also said that if you would like to talk to him, he really would welcome it, of course, at his home. So if any of you would like to talk to him about ideas, I guess you feel free to get in touch with me, Carol Saron, and I will lead that path. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Rosemary.
Thanks, Carol. Carol's made my job very easy because she's just taken away all the remarks I was going to make. But I will say a few things by way of introduction. As everyone here knows, Bill Chambliss, Art Stinchcombe, and Philip Selznick have made a profound and indelible contribution to the sociology of law as a field of scholarly inquiry. If I were to introduce them properly, we'd be here for the next 3 hours because each of them has a range of honorary degrees, distinguished scholar awards, fellowships, elected offices. So I'm not going to go through any detailed introduction, in part because most all of you know most of that history. But I will provide instead, I will simply say instead that for the last 5 decades, Bill, Philip, and Art have led us in very different and distinctive ways toward the empirical and theoretical understanding of the sociology of law in America. And what this evening is intended to be is really an opportunity to both honor them, but also to engage them in a conversation about their recollections of the founding of the field of the sociology of law, about how they decided to use the sociology of law in their work as a pathway for scholarly inquiry, and about what their thoughts on the current state of the sociology of law are. Now, the Sociology of Law and the Crime, Law, Deviance section hope that this conversation will offer partial oral histories of the development of the field of the sociology of law. And with that in mind, this conversation is being videotaped. It will be printed in the Sociology of Law Section newsletter subsequently. Now, what we're hoping to do tonight is have as many of you as possible participate in this conversation by asking questions of Art and Bill. But before I open it up to you for those questions, let me start by offering them an opportunity to comment on how they found the sociology of law a useful approach to the questions that have intrigued them throughout their careers. So perhaps I'll turn it over to Bill and then to Art.
Thank you very much. And thank you all and the Society for this wonderful honor. I also want to thank my family for coming here. There are about 27 of them, I think. And thanks to the Society for not only providing this honor, but also providing a home for me for all these many years. I was not sure I liked the idea that it had been 50 years, but it's actually been more than 50 years that I've been working in this field. And in some ways, it all started with Edwin Sutherland for me, because he made a comment in one of his papers that in order to understand crime, you also had to understand the law. So when I went to graduate school at Indiana, I decided to take a minor in law in the law school, along with Roland Shilton. He and I did this together. And Jerome Hall was one of the most important figures in the law school, and a terrible terror of a man, but a wonderful teacher and a great scholar. And so that was where, in the law school, I started doing a study on labor law, and I became interested in vagrancy law. So I spent a lot of time in the basement of the law school looking at old records from the 13th, 14th, 15th century, trying to figure out what these vagrancy laws were all about. And I submitted it to my labor law professor, and he said, this is way too radical for any kind of paper to be submitted. And I, frankly, did not have a clue what he was talking about. Because when I wrote the paper, I looked at the data and interpreted it the only way it made sense to me. It did not come from any theoretical basis or any idea of how I was interpreting it. In fact, a year after the article was published, I came to the ASA meeting, and I met someone from the University of Hawaii, and he said, oh, Bill Chambliss, you're the guy who writes those Marxist analysis of law. And I could have fallen on my face. In the 1950s, when I was an undergraduate at UCLA and a graduate student at Indiana, the only Marx we ever heard of was Groucho. There were no readings in Karl Marx. There was nothing about Marxist theory. There was no mention of it. A lot of Parsons, who you probably have never heard of today. But there was a lot of Parsons, and some Merton, but certainly no Marx. So I decided I should find out what was Marx saying in anticipation of what I was going to do. I thought it was anticipatory plagiarism without any question. So when I went back to the university, by this time, I formed a Marxist study group, which my dear friend Rich Applebaum was in and was mostly the most important person in it, in fact, and began to learn a bit about Marx. And the more I learned, the more I thought, it's very strange that we've ignored this guy all these years. So I published that article on vagrancy law. And when I published it, I don't think anyone read it. I didn't expect anyone to read it. And in fact, I thought, well, if you're going to have a career in academia, you better do something other than the sociology of law, because there isn't any field called the sociology of law. So I wrote some papers in social psychology. And I'll stop after this next short story. A few years later, many years later, I was invited to Pennsylvania State University to give a lecture. And the head of the psychology department ran into the head of the criminal justice department and said, oh, I'm so glad you're having Bill Chambliss. He does that wonderful work on friendship. and Al Block said, no, that can't be him. And so the psychology chair didn't come to the lecture. And in fact, it was no longer on friendship.
Well, I don't know how to start, but Bill Selznick is older than I am, and that is indicated by the fact that he was my dissertation supervisor, and consequently I was looking forward to being grand old man buddies up here with Phil Selznick, at last, somehow, at least symbolically, his equal. And I'm very sorry that he can't make it, but I hope I manage to get to 90 or 91 with whatever he is in anything like the intellectual shape that he's in. And I hope I'm not blind with it. I don't want to imitate him in every way. However, we both came out, we were very familiar with